Nowadays, hacking is definitely not as fun as it was back in the day. Looking back over a decade ago, I should now share what I got away with around age 13 at my middle school and local community using the solid material I found at bookstores and forums. There were a lot of free, easily reproducible exploits available on the underground exploit source code site Millworm, which is no longer around to my knowledge. But I knew if I just started copying and pasting high-level exploits, I would easily be pwned by someone else because I had no idea how to cover my tracks. Reading the code alone was practically a foreign language, nor was I even well versed enough in Linux back then. For defense, I used Hide My Ass, CyberGhost VPN, stolen accounts, botted computers, hall passes, computer lab systems, or library Macintoshes, and many neighborhood houses of friends who would let me sneak in and use their Wi-Fi. At least I had every single version of Microsoft Windows, stolen or not, at my single parent's home. Down the street, there were a lot of gangsters rolling around at night, people leaving weird graffiti, and paranoid farmers patrolling their property. Also, the police were just looking for anything. And at school, I faced a lot of bullies. I was lucky enough because a few of my teachers were cool. I decided to preoccupy myself by learning basic programming and networking on Windows because I woke up and saw my mind was decaying from too much music and video games. I began asking serious questions and reading more about anything I could get my hands on. I tried the CDs pictured here. Around the same time, I also started using Cain and Abel, Brutus, low orbit ion cannon, free keyloggers, and file binders, just to name a few tools. I was leveraging underground forum connections with older people that actually coded their own malware, defacement pages, website backdoor shells, and Linux kernels. By 14, I was at least a Linux intermediate user after how paranoid I became. Someone, either corporate or federal, finally pwned my buggy Windows Vista box through a compromised Sony torrent. This was just after I had conquered two nasty rootkits using WebRoot and a Windows backup. My cheap desktop was stuck in a boot cycle with a nasty message from what was obviously a well-paid opponent. I realized how deep this was after I found no record of the message anywhere else on the internet using an alternate system, my HP Pavilion laptop that was always overheating. I could not find the creepy message anywhere else online. It was a unique backdoor for me all along. I was crying and my mom said I was probably going to juvenile hall, so I wiped the drive from the BIOS and switched to Vanilla Debian and didn't look back. Of course, nothing ever came of this instance, but the worst part was that a friend lost his skateboarding footage from a single day and targeted me for years after. By then, I was familiar with Backtrack, now called Kali Linux, and even dabbled in Weaker Than Linux by Weaknet Labs too, but my IRC connection said I should just stick to coding on my own and stop using so many tools. This was ironic because they had chosen me as a private contact due to my skills at writing guides for rarely used tools such as SSL Strip, which was a tool made by Moxie Marlinspike that had me doing serious man-in-the-middle attacks for a change. Also, I kept up with SecurityTube and Vivek Ramachandran, a famous hacker. The other online friends beside these guys around the world were simply into hacking other hackers, so I eventually left the group considering the sheer amount of attention they were getting for doing just that. I was being socially engineered by them too, and did not feel like working on a kernel. I was busy pwning in other ways. Now let us really delve into what I accidentally accomplished back in the day. Thousands of torrents were the least of the loot. My school's FTP server was, for no good reason, wide open with directories corresponding to every staff member. I found a bunch of study guides, homework tests and answers, etc. It was clear to me that some of the staff were clever enough not to trust this FTP server and left their directories empty because they also noticed this loophole. However, the upload dates had shown just how many teachers were still posting private info to what was essentially the damn ClearNet to me. It was some kind of easy backup system that they used but were too lazy to restrict reader privileges for. I kept a lid on my findings and I tried to let the office staff know in person, but they did not seem to get it. I just wanted them to pay me already. A certain, still widely used testing grading website we used in '09 had no mechanisms in place to prevent brute force attacks of student login. Not only that, there was a JavaScript exploit you could simply paste into the URL after only gathering several key elements from the testing page's source code, i.e. the variables for the questions, numbers, and answers you were on. I kept a lid on this other separate brute force exploit for my eyes only. We will talk what I did with that one later. I profit off of this first exploit by writing all the necessary JavaScript code down for my own reference, and then I printed out my instructions at a local Staples. I then sold the copies off to my trusted friends for $20 a pop. They kept a lid on the whole thing for about 8 months until someone in a position of power figured it out, no doubt, and patched the whole thing. I warned everyone not to snitch ahead of time. At 14, had enough money to buy my own food with my own lunch money for a change. Dudes were giving me free clothes also. I spent money on Xbox Live and saved some of the money for pricey malware or VPNs if I needed them. I saved the brute force login vulnerability for myself because all the accounts had an easily crackable 6-digit numeral password, and the usernames were also basic and standardized according to graduation date. I could just open Facebook or the phone book, check the student's exact name, spelling, and age, and I had access to the student's grades like I was their parent. I also had the ability to change grades by failing tests using accounts on that previously mentioned unrelated service that I had written guides about. This separate service's brute force login exploit was the root of what could have been an entire student access manager database breach. I sat on this exploit for a while, a final successful login request, and I had access to 2 accounts owned by the same student. Cross-referencing each of these 2 vulnerable websites, which were owned by different companies, was noisy, however, so I never ran the brute force vulnerability too much because I knew they would patch it eventually, considering how noisy the attack would have appeared if the web server admin had something like Wireshark running in real time. I thought ahead of time and saved this vulnerability for nasty bullies that would mess with people in class or the hallway. If I had told the teachers about how much hacking I was doing, they might have expelled me. In 8th grade, a whole class was making fun of me regularly for hacking, so I had no choice but to unleash hell on a certain individual, and the entire school shut up for a while. I hacked them using the previously mentioned method. Parents just warned my psychopathic bullying classmate to stay away from me like the plague or they would have been pwned. I was drinking stolen authentic Patron mixed with Gatorade in 8th grade, trying to smoke weed, and I was at my homie's house a lot. We had a 4-wheeler, a dirt bike, chicks were pulling up, noticing us, and we were doing fun hood rat stuff on a daily basis, hacks included. I was selling leaked accounts and guides in a trench coat. My bus stop was on a famous haunted road with murky connections to the Illuminati. There was even some creepy cult website dedicated to this haunted road. I never found out who owned the website, though, and it mysteriously vanished at some point over the years. I got creeped out and hung out on my friends' couches instead. I obtained a private cell off an individual in a forum, and I decided to deface a theme park's website as a private treat at a close friend's party. It was hilarious and weird because we would lay on the couch for weeks watching TV or using laptops and nobody was bothering us. I spent seasons making the perfect defacement page, which had a grimy track by Donkey Rollers in the background. It scared the rest of the bullies to death when it magically appeared and typed out a bunch of commands in front of them. Dudes were bugging out hardcore, and my close friends thought it was epic and hilarious. This was all in middle school somehow, and it all stopped after a few detentions because they were seriously worried. In high school, I spent a lot of time studying, learning, and working. I spent a year on perfecting my C++ skills, another year programming digital robots with Java in a college-level class, and I even mined my first bitcoins using 2 ASIC blades. Foolishly, I spent my first bitcoin on cannabis or online poker on tour. If I had saved the bitcoins, I would have been rich today. The geeky crew I was a part of had a few people who even went on to Ivy League schools. And by the time I started saving bitcoins, my miner had caught on fire in my house when I was not home. I'm lucky I didn't burn the house down. Rest in peace, Bitcoin miner. I remember doing a keynote my senior year of high school when Bitcoin was between $80 and $130. Really felt like I truly graduated, though, when I dropped out of college to study as an independent researcher. Anyway, that's all, and I hope you enjoyed this story. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, please check out my website, hackguru.tech. I post a lot of interesting articles that I write, and I also do consultations. Alright, thank you very much. Have a good one.